You think you belong here? Rashid's voice dripped with mockery as he leaned back in his leather chair, a cruel smile playing across his lips. Fine. Consider yourself invited to the charity gala. Let's see how you handle real society. The other executives in the boardroom chuckled, their laughter echoing off the mahogany walls as Amara stood perfectly still, her dark eyes betraying nothing. She had worked as Rashid Al-Farid's personal assistant for 3 years, enduring his casual racism and deliberate humiliation with professional composure. But this invitation, delivered like a slap disguised as a gift, would mark the beginning of his downfall. What Rashid didn't know was that the quiet woman he tormented daily was about to transform his cruelest joke into his most devastating mistake. The Emirates Financial Tower gleamed against the Dubai skyline, its glass facade reflecting the desert sun like a beacon of wealth and power. Inside the 42nd floor, Rashid Al-Farid commanded an empire built on oil investments, real estate, and the systematic exploitation of those he deemed beneath him. His corner office was a testament to excess, decorated with artifacts from around the world, each piece carefully chosen to intimidate visitors and remind them of his global reach. Persian rugs covered Italian marble floors, while ancient manuscripts lined shelves between modern sculptures, worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Rashid himself was the perfect embodiment of inherited privilege, a man who had never worked for anything, but believed his wealth made him superior to everyone around him. At 38, he had spent his entire adult life using money as a weapon, crushing anyone who dared challenge his authority or question his methods. His treatment of employees was legendary in the worst possible way, particularly his cruelty toward foreign workers who depended on their visas for survival. He took perverse pleasure in reminding them of their powerlessness, often making decisions that affected their lives with the casual indifference of someone swatting flies. His favorite target had become Amara Thompson, the brilliant assistant who had been assigned to manage his chaotic schedule and increasingly complex business dealings. Amara had arrived in Dubai 3 years earlier, with credentials that should have secured her a senior position at any major corporation. She held advanced degrees in international finance and business administration from Oxford University, spoke 6 languages fluently, and had recommendations from professors who described her as one of the most gifted students they had ever taught. But the combination of subtle racism in the hiring process and her lack of family connections had relegated her to assistant positions, despite her qualifications. She had taken the job with Rashid's company, believing it would be temporary, a stepping stone to something better. Instead, she found herself trapped in a cycle of overwork and abuse, her talents deliberately suppressed by a man who seemed to take pleasure in wasting her potential. Every day brought fresh humiliations designed to remind her of her place. Rashid would demand she work late, preparing reports that he would ignore, send her on meaningless errands during important meetings to exclude her from decisions, and regularly make comments about her background that skirted the edge of harassment while remaining technically professional. His favorite tactic was assigning her tasks far below her abilities, while praising less qualified colleagues, ensuring she remained frustrated and undervalued. He had convinced himself that keeping talented people down was simply smart management, a way to maintain control and prevent challenges to his authority. The charity gala had been planned for months, a glittering event designed to raise money for education initiatives across the Middle East and Africa. It would be held at the Burj Al Arab, with tickets costing $5,000 each and attendance limited to the region's most influential families. Rashid served on the organizing committee, a position that gave him significant influence over the guest list and event planning. The gala was exactly the kind of event where appearances mattered most, where social status was displayed through designer gowns, expensive jewelry, and careful networking among the elite. For Rashid, it represented the perfect opportunity to reinforce his position in high society, while publicly demonstrating his supposed commitment to charitable causes. The invitation had been delivered during a particularly tense board meeting, where Rashid was facing pressure from investors about declining returns on several major projects. His mood was already volatile when Amara entered to deliver urgent documents that required his signature. She moved efficiently through the room, distributing papers with quiet professionalism, while the executives continued their heated discussion about market conditions and competitive pressures. One investor, clearly frustrated with Rashid's defensive responses, had suggested bringing in outside consultants to review their strategic planning processes. Rashid's face had flushed with anger at the suggestion, his pride wounded by any implication that his leadership might be inadequate. He needed to reassert his dominance, to remind everyone in the room of his power and their dependence on his goodwill. His eyes fell on Amara as she finished distributing documents, and inspiration struck him like lightning. Here was the perfect target for his frustration. Someone he could humiliate safely while demonstrating his casual control over those beneath him. The idea formed quickly in his mind. A cruel joke that would entertain his colleagues while putting his assistant in her place once and for all. Standing slowly from his chair, Rashid adopted the tone he used when making grand pronouncements to the press. His voice carried across the room with practiced authority as he addressed Amara directly, ensuring every executive could hear his words clearly. The invitation was delivered with theatrical flourish, each word chosen to maximize the humor for his audience while minimizing any possibility that she might actually accept. He expected her to stammer, to make excuses, to decline gracefully while acknowledging her obvious unsuitability for such an exclusive event. Instead, Amara looked directly into his eyes with an expression of calm acceptance that sent an unexpected chill down his spine. Her response was simple, professional, and completely devastating in its quiet dignity. She thanked him for the invitation, confirmed the date and location, and asked if there were any specific protocols she should observe as his representative at the event. The word representative hit Rashid like a physical blow, transforming his private joke into a public commitment that he couldn't easily retract without losing face in front of his investors. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the entertainment they had expected was becoming something else entirely. Amara's composure turned Rashid's cruelty back on itself, exposing the petty motivation behind his gesture while trapping him in his own web of social expectations. What none of them knew was that Amara had been preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity for months. Her calm acceptance wasn't coincidental or naive, but rather the activation of a carefully constructed plan that would soon reshape the power dynamics in that room permanently. The gala invitation that Rashid intended as humiliation would become the stage for a transformation that would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about power, privilege, and the dangerous consequences of underestimating those you seek to oppress. In the days following the meeting, Rashid tried to convince himself that his joke would still succeed. He imagined Amara arriving at the gala in some inappropriate outfit, struggling with the formal protocols, embarrassing herself in front of people who mattered. He shared the story with friends and colleagues, painting it as an amusing experiment in social dynamics, while reassuring himself that her inevitable failure would reinforce all his assumptions about class and breeding. The thought of her discomfort became a source of entertainment that helped him ignore the growing pressure from investors and the mounting evidence that his company was facing serious financial difficulties. But Amara was using the time very differently. She had been waiting years for the right moment to reveal her true background, to step out of the shadow of systematic oppression and claim the recognition her achievements deserved. The invitation, however cruelly intended, provided the perfect opportunity to shatter every assumption Rashid had made about her identity and capabilities. What he didn't know was that beneath the surface of the overworked assistant lay a woman whose family connections, personal wealth, and social standing far exceeded his own. The transformation he was about to witness would redefine not just her position in his world, but his understanding of the world itself. The Burj Al Arab rose from the Persian Gulf like a sail frozen in gold and glass, its distinctive silhouette dominating Dubai's coastline as the sun set behind its curved walls. Tonight, the hotel's royal suite level had been transformed into a glittering ballroom, where the region's most powerful families gathered to display their wealth, while ostensibly supporting education initiatives across Africa and the Middle East. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors, while servers in pristine uniforms circulated with champagne and delicacies flown in from around the world. The guest list read like a directory of Middle Eastern royalty, oil executives, tech entrepreneurs, and hereditary billionaires whose combined wealth could fund small nations. Rashid arrived early, dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than most people's annual salaries. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging greetings with fellow millionaires and positioning himself near the entrance where he could observe every arrival. His anticipation was palpable as he imagined Amara's inevitable appearance in some discount dress, her obvious discomfort providing entertainment for the evening's most discerning attendees. He had already begun crafting the story he would tell tomorrow, how his little social experiment had confirmed everything he believed about natural hierarchies and appropriate boundaries between classes. The early arrivals followed predictable patterns, each entrance choreographed to maximize impact and reinforce social positioning. Wives of oil ministers glided across the threshold in gowns worth more than luxury cars, their jewelry catching the light like captured stars, while photographers documented their arrival for society magazines. Tech billionaires made more understated entrances, their casual confidence speaking to new money's different relationship with display and tradition. Royal family members were announced with formal titles that traced bloodlines back centuries, their presence lending legitimacy to an event that was as much about networking as charity. As the evening progressed, Rashid found himself checking his watch repeatedly, his excitement building toward the moment when his assistant would arrive and provide the contrast that would amuse his peers. He had positioned himself strategically near a group of particularly snobbish socialites, women who took pride in their ability to spot inappropriate guests and comment on social missteps with surgical precision. Their whispered observations about other attendees' fashion choices and behavioral errors provided a preview of how they would receive Amara's inevitable social stumbling. The anticipation was delicious, a cruel entertainment that would reinforce his superiority while providing gossip material for weeks. But, as 10 o'clock approached and most guests had arrived, Rashid began to wonder if his joke had backfired in the most boring way possible. Perhaps Amara had simply chosen not to attend, recognizing her unsuitability for such company and sparing herself the embarrassment he had planned. The possibility that she might have declined to participate in her own humiliation was almost disappointing, robbing him of the spectacle he had been anticipating since the board meeting. He was beginning to consider this outcome when the ballroom's massive doors opened one final time. The transformation that followed would be replayed in whispered conversations and social media posts for years to come. Amara Thompson entered the Burj Al Arab ballroom like a vision from another world, her presence so commanding that conversations stopped mid-sentence and champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. She wore a custom gown that seemed to capture and reflect every light in the room, its deep emerald fabric flowing around her like liquid silk, while intricate beadwork caught the crystal chandelier's glow and threw it back in patterns that danced with every step. The dress had been designed by Valentino himself, a one-of-a-kind creation that represented months of collaboration and cost more than most people's home. But the gown was only the beginning of a revelation that would shatter every assumption in the room. Amara's jewelry spoke to wealth that transcended mere money, pieces that belonged in museums rather than at social gatherings. A diamond necklace that had once belonged to Ethiopian royalty graced her throat, its stones so perfect they seemed to generate their own light, while emerald earrings provided accents that complemented her gown with mathematical precision. Her hair had been styled by the same team that prepared celebrities for international film festivals, every curl and wave positioned to frame features that makeup artists had enhanced with techniques reserved for magazine covers and red carpet events. The silence that greeted her entrance was deafening, a collective intake of breath that seemed to drain oxygen from the enormous ballroom. Photographers, who had been documenting arrivals with professional boredom, suddenly scrambled for position as they recognized that something extraordinary was unfolding before their cameras. Society reporters, who thought they had seen every possible variation of wealth and beauty, found themselves speechless. Their usual commentary, inadequate for describing the vision that glided across the marble floor, with the confidence of someone who belonged in palaces rather than boardrooms. Rashid felt the world tilt beneath his feet, as recognition dawned like a physical blow. This woman, this goddess who commanded attention from every person in the room, was the same assistant he had been tormenting for 3 years. But that realization was only the first shock in a series of revelations that would demolish every assumption he had built about power, class, and his own position in the social hierarchy. As Amara moved through the crowd, guests began whispering her name with growing excitement and recognition. Titles and accomplishments that Rashid had never imagined began surfacing in conversations around him. The cruel joke he had planned became a mirror that reflected his own ignorance and prejudice back at him with devastating clarity. Every snide comment he had made about her background, every task he had assigned to humiliate her, every assumption he had made about her worthiness suddenly appeared in their true light, as the petty cruelties of a small man who had systematically abused someone far superior to himself. The laughter he had expected to generate at her expense was replaced by awed admiration for her grace and growing speculation about how someone of her obvious caliber had ended up working as his assistant in the first place. As the evening progressed, the full scope of Amara's true identity began to emerge through conversations that reached Rashid's ears, like reports from a battlefield where he was suffering total defeat. She was not just wealthy, but belonged to one of Africa's most distinguished families. Her father, a former ambassador whose diplomatic career had taken him to capitals around the world. Her mother was a renowned surgeon who had established medical schools across 3 continents while building a fortune through strategic investments in healthcare technology. Amara herself had been educated at the world's finest institutions. Her academic achievements, including publications in major journals and recognition from international organizations for her work in economic development. The networking that followed her entrance was unlike anything Rashid had witnessed at previous galas. Instead of the usual polite exchanges between social equals, genuine excitement rippled through conversations as business leaders and political figures competed for her attention and insight. Oil ministers sought her opinions on market trends, while tech entrepreneurs pitched collaboration opportunities that would have made Rashid's company irrelevant overnight. Royal family members extended invitations to private events that represented access to power networks Rashid could never hope to enter, despite years of trying to buy his way into their circles. Most devastating of all was watching Amara handle these interactions with the natural ease of someone who had been moving in such circles her entire life. She discussed policy implications with former heads of state, debated investment strategies with sovereign wealth fund managers, and shared insights about international development that revealed expertise far beyond anything Rashid possessed. Every conversation confirmed that she belonged in this world, not as an outsider seeking acceptance, but as natural aristocracy, whose temporary absence had been a loss for everyone present. The charity auction that formed the evening's centerpiece became the stage for Rashid's final humiliation. As lots were presented and bidding began, he watched in growing horror as Amara participated with the casual generosity of someone for whom money was merely a tool rather than a measure of worth. Her bids were strategic and informed, supporting causes she clearly understood, while demonstrating a philanthropic sophistication that made other donors seem amateur by comparison. When a lot supporting girls' education in rural Africa came up for auction, she bid with passionate intensity that drove the final price to record levels, while delivering an impromptu speech about educational equity that earned standing ovations from the crowd. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Rashid found himself increasingly isolated, while Amara became the center of multiple conversations about future collaborations and social engagements. Invitations were extended to events that would cement her position in high society, while business cards were exchanged for opportunities that represented millions in potential revenue. The woman he had been systematically oppressing for 3 years was revealed as someone whose personal network and business connections dwarfed his own, whose single endorsement could make or break companies like his, whose casual friendship represented access to power he had spent his entire life trying to achieve. The final blow came as Amara prepared to leave, surrounded by admirers and potential partners, while Rashid stood alone near the bar. She approached him with the same professional courtesy she had maintained throughout 3 years of abuse, thanking him for the invitation with gracious words that only emphasized how completely their positions had been reversed. Her departure was accompanied by a procession of influential guests who had arranged to continue conversations at exclusive after-parties, leaving Rashid to contemplate the wreckage of his assumptions in a ballroom that suddenly seemed empty despite containing hundreds of people. The transformation was complete, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. Rashid's cruel joke had become Amara's triumphant emergence from imposed obscurity, while his intended humiliation of her had become his own public exposure. as a man whose success had blinded him to the talent and dignity of those he had considered beneath him. The evening that was supposed to reinforce his superiority had instead revealed him as someone whose prejudices and cruelties had led him to waste 3 years oppressing someone far more accomplished and deserving of respect than he had ever been. In the days that followed the gala, the reverberations of that extraordinary evening spread through Dubai's business community like shockwaves from an earthquake. Social media exploded with images and videos of Amara's stunning appearance, but more importantly, the story behind her transformation began to emerge as journalists investigated how someone of her obvious caliber had remained hidden in an assistant's role for so long. The narrative that developed painted an uncomfortable picture of systemic discrimination and wasted talent, with Rashid's company serving as a case study in how prejudice could blind successful people to the potential of those around them. Amara's revelation had attracted attention from organizations across the Middle East and beyond, with job offers arriving daily from companies eager to secure her expertise and connections. Her academic background and family ties opened doors to consulting opportunities with governments and international development organizations, while her performance at the gala had demonstrated a sophistication that made her valuable to any enterprise seeking to expand into African markets or navigate complex diplomatic relationships. Within a week, she had resigned from her assistant position to accept a senior partnership with a prestigious investment firm that specialized in emerging markets. The contrast with Rashid's situation could not have been more stark. His treatment of Amara had become public knowledge through media coverage of the gala, with several prominent business people questioning how such talent could have been so thoroughly misused. Investors who had already been concerned about his company's performance began withdrawing their support, citing cultural issues and poor leadership as factors in their decisions. The board of directors, which had once found his casual cruelty entertaining, now viewed it as a liability that threatened their reputation and bottom line. More damaging than the business consequences were the social repercussions that followed Rashid through every public appearance. The same peers who had laughed at his jokes about employees now treated him with barely concealed disdain, their changed attitudes reflecting a broader shift in how his behavior was perceived. Invitations to exclusive events began drying up as hosts realized that his presence might offend guests who had been impressed by Amara's grace and dignity. The social standing he had spent his life cultivating crumbled as people reassessed their relationships with someone who had proven capable of such systematic cruelty. The most painful aspect of his downfall was watching Amara's meteoric rise from a distance, seeing her achieve in months what he had never accomplished despite decades of effort. Her new position gave her influence over investment decisions that could make or break companies throughout the region, while her growing reputation as an expert in African development made her opinion valuable to governments and international organizations. She moved through the same social circles that had once defined his world, but now he found himself excluded while she was welcomed as someone whose insights and connections added value to every gathering. Rashid's company began hemorrhaging talent as word spread about the toxic culture he had fostered. Employees who had witnessed his treatment of Amara realized they could be next, while prospective hires chose competitors who offered more respectful working environments. The brain drain accelerated as his most capable staff members found better opportunities elsewhere, leaving him with a depleted organization that struggled to compete in an increasingly complex market. The empire he had built through intimidation and exploitation proved fragile when subjected to scrutiny and accountability. The irony was overwhelming and inescapable. In trying to humiliate someone he considered inferior, Rashid had inadvertently revealed her superiority while exposing his own inadequacies. The gala invitation he had intended as a cruel joke had become the catalyst for Amara's liberation from an oppressive situation and his own fall from grace. Every aspect of the evening that was supposed to reinforce existing hierarchies had instead overturned them, demonstrating that true worth had nothing to do with inherited wealth or social position, but rather with character, ability, and the capacity to treat others with dignity. As months passed and the consequences of that evening continued to unfold, Rashid was forced to confront the reality that his worldview had been fundamentally flawed. The woman he had spent 3 years undermining was now one of the most sought-after professionals in the region, while his own reputation lay in ruins. The prejudices that had seemed like natural insights into human nature were revealed as blind spots that had prevented him from recognizing extraordinary talent even when it worked directly for him every day. Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to thank you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to show your support by liking and subscribing to this channel. Now, back to the story. The lesson was clear and brutal in its simplicity. Power without wisdom becomes tyranny. Privilege without compassion becomes oppression. And those who use their advantages to diminish others ultimately diminish themselves. Rashid had learned too late that true strength comes not from putting people down, but from lifting them up, not from hoarding opportunities, but from creating them for others. His fall from grace served as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to mistake temporary advantages for permanent superiority. The story of that evening became legendary in business circles throughout the Middle East, a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of recognizing talent wherever it might be found. But for Amara, it represented something more profound than professional vindication. It was proof that dignity and excellence could not be permanently suppressed, that truth had a way of emerging despite systematic efforts to bury it, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, was ultimately inevitable for those who persevered with grace and determination. The ballroom of the Burj Al Arab had witnessed many spectacular events over the years, but none more transformative than the evening when a cruel joke became a revelation, when intended humiliation became triumphant emergence, and when the powerless proved that they had always possessed the greatest power of all, the ability to rise above those who sought to keep them down. In the end, Rashid's invitation had accomplished exactly what he intended. It had revealed someone's true nature and appropriate place in society. He had simply been wrong about whose nature would be revealed and whose place would be forever changed.